This tutorial will show you how to type an equation into your graphing calculator and have your calculator fill out a table of values for you, as well as have your calculator graph the equation in a couple different windows. We start by pressing the on key on our calculator, locate the y equals key on your calculator shown here. The first thing to notice that even though the output variable in my equation is a, the calculator will force you to call the output variable y sub 1. Now I type my equation in by pressing 8. Now I'll use the subtract key. Make sure you use the key I'm pointing to here rather than the negative key down here. You will get an error when graphing if you use the negative key in this context. So I'm going to use the subtract key, type the number 2, then locate the button that seems to have 4 symbols on it here. When I press it, I get the letter X. So notice, even though in my problem I want to use the letter N, the calculator forces me to use the letter X. So it's very important throughout the rest of the problem that you realize whenever the calculator uses the letter X, that would be the value for N in our problem. And whenever the calculator displays the letter Y, that would really be the variable A for our problem. Next, I want to set up the table by going to the table set in my calculator. Since table set is right above the window key, it's the second function of the window key, so I have to press the second key, then window. I want to change one setting in my table set. I want the independent variable changed to ask, so the calculator will ask me what values we want to plug into the equation. So I'm going to go down twice, to the right, press enter, and the way the table is set up now is it's going to ask me what numbers I want to plug in. For us, that's -5, 0, and 2, etc. And it'll automatically give us the values of the other variable in the problem, which would be A. So now to fill out the table, since table is the second feature of the graph key, I press second, then I press graph, and this is where I'll start typing in my values of N. And remember, the calculator, it uses X. So I'm going to type in -5, and notice I'm going to use the negative key this time rather than the subtract key. So I'll type negative, then 5. I'll press enter, and notice as soon as I pressed enter, it plugged in the value of -5 for N and automatically gave me the A value, which it's labeling as Y1, and that turns out to be 18. So that number would go right here. Plugging -5 in for N, the calculator is saying the value of A would be 18. All we need to do now is type in the rest of our N values, which is 0. I'll press enter, press 2, press enter, then 7, enter, 9, enter, finally the number 12, enter. Now I can just copy the values of A into my table in my workbook. So those values were 8, 4, -6, -10, and -16. Now I want my calculator to give me a graph of this equation in a couple different windows. Then we are to, in this box given below, draw what we see on our calculator screen for that given window. So from where we left off, let's graph this equation in a viewing window that goes from -10 to 10 on the x-axis and -10 to 10 on the y-axis. You do this by pressing the window key. A standard window in the calculator will already be set at -10 to 10 on the x-min and x-max, and -10 to 10 on the y-min and y-max. If you have something other than that, you could type over the values that are currently in your calculator by just pressing the number you want, -10. Either press the down arrow or the enter key. And if you had a different value other than 10 here, you could simply just type over it by pressing 10. And go down and type in the rest of the values so that your values match the ones shown here. Once you have those 4 settings in your calculator to match what's in the workbook, press the graph key shown here. Now that it's done graphing, it's up to me to just draw a sketch of what I see. So I'm going to draw normally what we'd label as X and Y axes. If you wanted to label them, this is always the values that we plug into the equation. For us, that was N. And this axis, normally labeled the y-axis, will be labeled A for our problem because what we got out of the equation had the variable A. On our screen, we got a line that looked something like this. If you want to indicate what your viewing window was, you could label what we'd normally call the x-axis, negative 10 to 10, and label what we'd normally call the y-axis, negative 10 to 10. And that would be as much detail as I want to provide now. To change my window settings to these here, I will press the window key again on my calculator. And as said before, I can just type over the new values over the old values. So I press 0, enter, 5, enter. Go down to the y-min, and we want that to be negative 2. So I type negative 2, making sure I use the negative key again and not the subtract key. Press enter. And the y-max here is 8 in the workbook. So I just type 8, enter. Now that I have the settings the way I want them, I will press the graph key. I get that same line again as a graph, but it looks slightly different because I changed the window. Now I just need to draw a quick sketch of what I see in my calculator window in the space provided here in my workbook. So our graph started in the upper left-hand corner like this and looked pretty much a bit like this here. If you want to add the details, that this axis were the numbers I put into the equation, n, and this axis represents the numbers that came out of our equation, a. My x max was 5, and remember in our problem we didn't call this x, we called it n. And then the values of a, which my calculator is calling y, went from negative 2 to 8. So this here is negative 2, and this is 8. Let's repeat this with a different equation. I'm going to go back to my y equals. If you want to clear your previous equation, you can press the clear button, or you can just type over it with the new equation. I prefer to press clear. I will type 28. Left parenthesis can be found here. The number 1, decimal point 17. The right parenthesis can be found here. To get the letter t in the exponent, I'll use what's called a caret key here. And then I'll use this key to get the letter x, like in the previous example. Now remember, when the calculator uses the letter x, that would be the letter t in our problem. And when the calculator uses the letter y, that would be capital P in our problem. Because we set the table up in the previous problem so that it asks us for the inputs, we no longer have to do that. It'll stay that way until the calculator's batteries die or we change those settings. So I'm going to go straight to the table by pressing the second key, then the graph key. You can either delete these numbers one at a time, or you can simply type over them with the new numbers. This is what it looks like if you press the delete key several times. Now I want to type in t equals negative 15. So under the x column, I use the negative key, then 15, enter, then negative 5, enter, 0, enter, and then the last three numbers are 5, enter, 10, enter, and finally 15, enter. You may notice that the calculator seems to round in random ways in the table. This is because it can only fit about 5 digits wide on the screen, so it always provides 5 digits. The problem in the workbook says to round to the nearest tenth as needed. So we have plenty of accuracy in this display, but it's nice for you to know if ever you wanted to see more of the digits, you could always go up and to the right and highlight a number and see many more decimal places displayed below. And I'll record those numbers in my chart here. In my calculator, it was 2.65. This 5 is either 5 or higher, so that'll make this 6 into a 7. The next number was 12.77, so to the 10th place, this will get rounded up to an 8, since this number is 5 or higher. The third number was exactly 28, no need to round. This number was 61.38. This number is 5 or higher, making this 3 round to a 4. this number was 134.59. This number's 5 or higher, making this 5 round to a 6. Finally, this number was 295.08. This number's 5 or higher, so I will round this digit to a 1. Now that I've completed the table, it's time to get the calculator to graph my equation in a couple different windows. So to get the standard viewing window, you can press Window and type over the previous values we had in the last problem with -10 and 10. If ever you want the standard viewing window, there's a shortcut to typing these in. You can press the Zoom key, and then notice number 6 is Zoom Standard. If I simply press 6, not only will it change my window settings, it'll actually graph my equation in that window. If you want to be sure that it changed the settings as we desired, press the window key and verify that the settings are indeed what we wanted them to be. -10 to 10 on the x-axis, -10 to 10 on the y-axis. Let me go back to graph, and I'll draw a quick sketch of the picture in the area provided here. Notice there isn't much to draw. This means that many of the points simply don't have coordinates are between -10 and 10. Our graph was sort of curvy and was in the upper left hand corner like this. And that was on a window from -10 to 10 on what we'd normally call the x-axis. But for our problem, we were using t for the values that we put into the equation. So if you want, you can label this t. Now, normally we'd label this the y-axis, but in our problem we were using capital P, and those values went from -10 to 10 because we were graphing in the standard window. Let's change our settings to these here by pressing the window key. I'm just going to type over the numbers that are already in there by pressing the negative key, 15, and we want an x-max of +15. So either press down arrow or enter and type 15. Go down to the y-min. We want that to be 0. Press enter. And then we want the y-max to be 300. The reason we didn't see much of our graph in the previous window is because many of the points on the graph have values much bigger than 10. So we're changing this to 300 in hopes to see more of the graph. Press the graph key. This is a much better window for my equation because it seemed to be hidden in my previous window. So in this window, I'll have to draw a sketch of this, and this time my window went from -15 to 15 in this direction, and the values that came out of the function, which were p-values, got really big. In fact, this one was 295. So that would be at the very top of our screen because our screen went as high as 300. The graph looked something like this. I hope the tutorial made sense, and I wish you the best of luck.